I was initially just a scientific officer. Then I was changed over to working on fuels and examining them when they came out of the reactor and making deductions from that. Then I became branch head, and then I moved on to being a division head, and then, among many other things in my responsibilities, the most interesting one was when some of the fuel in early CANDU reactors started leaking. A whole team of us developed something that would stop the fuels leaking. Then I moved on to administration within Chalk River, assistant to the site head, and did a lot of I would call it it's public relations. I like to think the clean sense. I was sold as an honest scientist and not a public relations man. And I did a lot of traveling to town hall meetings and television appearances, television debate. That time there was a cabinet minister and one of the famous nuclear critics on the other side, myself, and I forget his name on my side. And after the debate, the cabinet minister, a lady, came across and hugged me, which is the first time I've had a hug from a cabinet minister, and perhaps the first time I wanted one. And she said she doesn't have anything against me and Chalk River people. It's those people in Ottawa that I dislike. Anyway, it was that kind of life. But all the time I was doing sort of odd jobs in Ottawa, in Chalk River administration. And the most interesting one perhaps was at the, I know it is the Porter Review. Professor Porter was the commissioner on Ontario Nuclear Safety Review, and there were several of them that I was involved with. But anyway, that one where I appeared for AECL, and another man appeared for Ontario Hydro, and between us we had to take on a whole lot of anti-nuclears.
During noon hours, I used to read the translations of Russian papers in the library. Yeah. And I was sometimes the only person there over noon hour because people generally went for a walk or something. So I decided to be interesting to see what they were doing. And I found this really interesting article that two Russian scientists from the Kurchatov Institute in Moscow had made a small nuclear battery by taking a radioactive material that emits electrons. They're called beta rays, very energetic electrons, when it decays, so radioactive decay. And they had put it in a wire and an insulator and made it into a little cable. And they found that in a very high neutron irradiation in a reactor, that these would produce a measurable current proportional to the neutron intensity, hence neutron detector. And they thought this would make kind of a battery, that would be a small kind of battery.
Wow.
They were chemists, radiochemists, who had produced this thing. And when I saw this, I said, whoopee, this thing would make a great instrument for measuring flux, measuring neutron intensity. So their idea sponsored in my mind a practical application.
Yeah.
So I'm an applied physicist, and that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't take me long to lash up a very quick imitation of what they did,
Yeah.
because it was so simple. I mean, just really easy. So I asked my boss, look, can we get this in a beam hole in the reactor, in a test hole? Check it out. No time at all.
Wow.
And normally, we'd been used to measuring radioactivity with a Geiger counter. We hear tick, 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 and they just come in ones and twos. Now we have this current, an actual current you can measure with a meter. So I could appreciate why, the neutron intensity was such a powerful source to test it. So in no time at all, we knew the thing worked. It worked well.
Wow.
So all I had to contribute was to then discover materials that would withstand the hostile environment in the heart of a reactor. Mm-hmm. It would perform even under intense radiation. It wouldn't wear out. It wouldn't corrode. So that turned out to be fairly easy, because there were lots of other wires inside of the similar nature. So again, it didn't take very long to make it into a practical device that would measure a neutron intensity in the heart of a reactor. Prior to that, you measure the neutrons outside the reactor in large chambers that were a different type of instrument for measuring. And they were very good, but it's not the same thing as getting the detailed picture of the variation throughout the whole core of the reactor, which changes intensity from the beginning to the outside. So they were installed later by the hundreds in our reactors and in other reactors in other countries.
Wow.
And the Russian inventors were fascinated to hear about this.
I bet.
And I had a very nice letter from one of them once commenting on this.
As you spent time at Chalk River, you moved up the chain of responsibility in odds and ends. Later on, both NRU and NRX were beginning to feel their age on things, and parts for things like control systems were hard to obtain. And what were some of your memories of the difficulties and experiences in through there?
Well, of course, changing the vessel would be the major thing in NRX.
Yep.
The other biggest single factor was that the metallurgist, none of us realized how uranium moves around under radiation. It expands, or it lengthens, or it does this, or it cracks. And the biggest continuing problem in NRX was to get the best possible fuel that wouldn't foul up in some way. They would, there was metal rods.
Right.
And the original rods, the biggest problem was that they would fatten up and split their sheaths under irradiation. And so Jack Nellis was the metallurgist, was working on trying to find a satisfactory rod, and we tried half a dozen different heat treatments and sheathing and spacing and so on to try and make these things last. But ruptured rods was a continuing problem in NRX because of fuel blockage. they expand to the point they start cutting off the
flow.
flow at the bottom. So that was a continuing problem, and it was eventually solved by using a beta heat-treated uranium metal with 4% cold work. And that elongated at a predictable rate. And we made some modifications to give it a little more room at the end, and we got a reasonable life out of those rods. And that was towards the end of metal rods period. They were later on went to oxides, but so that was a problem that bugged us in NRX for most of its life, was getting fuel that would not split its sheath or
Right.
do something else.
The one about having control rods in to be able to shape the field always seems to be a carryover from Candu's, where we've got control rods to flatten the flux in the calandria.
The design we ended up with was a superconducting magnet and the iron around it, and it had to shape poles for focusing, and then you have to fit an accelerator structure into it, and they wanted a very wide range of ions, from 3 MeV per nucleon, and uranium ions at 10 MeV per nucleon, and higher ones in between. But anyway, to cover the range required in the RF accelerating structure, meant most of these the machines that were built like this had to have tuners that stuck up 2 or 3 meters above the outside of the structure to get the frequency range they wanted on the resonators. So I have thought that, well, if we make a structure, a 2-element structure, it will have 2 resonant modes. One in which the if you like, the elements go in phase or they go out of phase, and if we make a 4-element thing, we could go with a what do you I guess both together or in opposition, and we could get accelerating fields for a wider range of frequencies by using both of those modes. And so we had one tuner at the top, one tuner at the bottom like this, and 2 Ds coming out. I got a little picture. This is the final 10th scale model that I used to calculate everything I needed for the final structure.
Right.
And the expert guys said you'll never get it to work if you have axial fields. This has axial fields in places. But I thought, well, if you reverse them equally, those axial fields are not going to cause any trouble. And they didn't.
So I applied to AACL, and they took me on. Incidentally, we spent the summer of 1959 at Chalk River. I was helping to operate the evaporator for the.
Was it for the plutonium processing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and one of those blew up before I got there.
1950. Yes.
Yes, and I knew very well why it blew up, and I wanted to make damn sure it wasn't going to blow up on me. Anyway, so I did that in 1959, and Sam and Elgin were still there. And we had a good summer, you know. But then I went back and next year and I graduated. And so by the time I resigned Polymer, I had already contacted AACL and they offered me a shift operator job at NRU. So I took that. And being the way I am, I really couldn't stand the shift work. So at one point, I made an aborted try at teaching school. And I was a good scoutmaster, but I was not a good teacher. And so I ended up going back to AACL and joining them at Sheridan Park. And that's where I met the first IBM computer. It wasn't at Sheridan Park, it was down in Toronto. But anyway, I worked there for some time, and somewhere along in there, John McManus called and said, "Why don't you come up and join the Atomic Energy Control Board?" He said, this is really an interesting place. And which I did, actually.
The Datatron was Burroughs' company.
Right.
And then the G20 came, and it was Bendix.
Okay.
And Bendix got eaten up by Control Data Corporation.
Okay.
And so after that, we had the CDC 3300 and 6600, and then eventually the 7600.
Right, okay. And the Datatron, clearly, we received from you some time ago all the manuals, so that was a great contribution to the society. The 66 system arrived, and did they begin to change the input and output, how people had to deal with that?
Well, the next was the G20, and it was still the card system. Yeah, someone would punch the cards. The programs were put on the cards.
Right.
Same as for the Datatron.
Right.
And there were programs and data, and it was all read in on
Right.
a card reader. And the output, this is to the G20.
Right.
Yeah.
When did the computing center as such come into being? Was that with the bigger machines, or?
No, it was, well, it depends on how you look at it. As soon as the Datatron was coming, there was a building built for it.
The 508?
The 508,
Right.
yeah, because before that we were in theoretical physics building, that little wooden building was next door to 508. So we all moved over to 508, and with the arrival of the Datatron. Something interesting we did for the Datatron was that it was programmed in programming language. So we wrote an assembler, so-called assembler, for the Datatron. And so that made it a little easier. Well, I mean, you knew what to do, but it was interesting that
Right.
we did that here. Jim Kennedy was the head of the computing center, and that's how things were organized that you were asking about, was that we were still part of theoretical physics branch, so our branch head was still Hank Clayton, but Jim Kennedy was head of the computing center in
Okay.
building 508.
Then you were at home for a few years?
Yes, till 1957.
Right.
I had the opportunity to work part-time in the town site lab, which was in the town site for low background.
It took us quite some time to find out, but the building was 463, which was just adjacent and slightly up the hill from the museum here, which is building 462.
Yes,
And they were built in 1952, we have found out.
okay.
And you were actually recruited then by Alec Cruikshank?
He had come around when I had, he had come around in 52 or late 51, and I said, no, I had 2 children. However, after I had the 3rd child, when she was 1 or nearly 1, then I agreed to come to work. I was ready.
And Alec was actually with the Defense Research Board at
Yes,
that time.
he was, yes.
And you became an employee of
Health and welfare.
and attached to Chalk River.
I think we were, I don't know how attached we were.
Right. Okay. The work you were able to do on a part-time basis, and even had a 4th child during that period that you were.
Yes, yes. Hmm.
And the lab in town here replaced then the first low background buildings, which we learned from you, were up near Will Hill House.
Yes,
Is now.
actually right along Mountain View Crescent.
Right. So from a photograph that I looked at, your present house is probably 200 meters or something from the back door of those buildings.
Yes, it is quite close.
When did you move into your present
In 57.
So, okay, so they probably took down most of those buildings then a few years before just.
Yes, yes.
What was your work in the low background lab?
I was analyzing milk samples for strontium-90.
From all across Canada? Or?
Yes, yes, from all across Canada.
And there, you were looking at wheat also, is that right?
Yes, we also did some wheat, yes. And actually had a sample from South America as well.
Right.
To show that most of the fallout stayed in the northern hemisphere, even though some of the bomb testings were close to the equator in the South Pacific.
It began in the late 40s, probably 46, 47. I wrote the long article on the beginnings of neutron scattering at Chalk River because it seemed to me that nobody else was in a better position to research what was going on, and I had the best chance of being able to understand what was done initially. And so I set myself the task which took a long time to record the whole history of neutron scattering at Chalk River from the beginning. So the work initially was carried out at the NRX reactor, which was going full steam at that time in the 47 sort of time frame. And the person that was most responsible for the beginning of the neutron scattering program was a man called Don Hurst, who later was head of the Atomic Energy Control Board in Ottawa. But he was the person that was in charge of research with neutrons, and he started doing experiments with neutrons. So most of the early experiments were in the field of nuclear physics rather than solid-state physics.
Right.
Because the interest at that time was probing the ins and outs of the nucleus. So the early work was all focused on the effects of neutron irradiation on the nucleus rather than on the solid-state character of the material. So the first experiments were done, for example, by Hurst and by a man called Alcock, Norman Alcock, for example, on the spin states of the deuteron. And very careful work it was too, which was being done in about 1947, that sort of time. Then they were interested in the measurements of transmission of neutrons through materials and the effect on nuclei. In fact, they were interested in the neutron resonances of several high-absorbing neutron materials, like in the rare earths, gadolinium, dysprosium, samarium, europium, possibly for control rod purposes. They wanted to know how well it worked. So the way this was done at Chalk River was using a crystal spectrometer. So the neutrons fell on a single crystal, actually usually at that point a natural single crystal, and the takeoff angle of the neutrons from the reactor gave them the energy of the neutron, and measurements were made over a wavelength range from 50 electron volts, very small angles, to about 1 millielectron volt, relatively high angles. And one of the interesting things they found was that the resonances followed the Bright-Wigner formula really pretty well, except as the atomic mass of the material they were examining came down, the deviations from the Bright-Wigner law became more apparent. And it was guessed by Brockhaus and Hurst that this was due to inelastic scattering in the material, which changed the wavelength of the neutrons before it hit the nucleus and gave a resonant result. So that was sort of one beginning hint that in fact there was inelastic scattering going on, and it could be seen at NRX. Now, Hurst hired Bert Brockhaus in 1951 from the University of Toronto. He'd just finished his PhD, and then also hired Dave Henshaw a year later in 1952 to work with him. So Henshaw was Hurst was particularly interested in liquids, and the field that Henshaw and Hurst entered was the measurement of the structure of liquids rather than the structure of solids.
Yeah, that's right. I decided I should go back and get a higher degree. So I went back and got my PhD in Alberta.
And what did you do for your thesis there?
I measured lifetimes of nuclear states for one thing. I don't know whether I can remember them. But I certainly had I was able to get equipment that I designed at Chalk River. If I wanted it out in Alberta, they were quite happy to send it to me. So I had very good equipment that I knew how to operate very well. So it made it very easy for me.
Oh, very good. So that was really more of the beginning of tilting in towards nuclear physics than electronics.
That's right, yeah.
When you came back, you started, one of the papers that I saw was working on oxygen-17 with another famous Chalk River, Ted Litherland.
Ted Litherland, he was the reason I came.
Uh-huh. And by then the Ian tandem was installed here, and
Yeah, it was operating when I came back as a nuclear physicist, yeah.
who else was around at that time in the nuclear physics group?
Harry Gove was there for a very short time, but left very shortly.
And he went to Rochester.
He went to Rochester. There's John Ferguson.
Yes, okay. John has been around.
John was there, and
was Bromley there, or had Bromley gone by
Bromley
then
had
as well?
already left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next really exciting thing that I guess came along was all of a sudden George Ewan and Tavendale began producing these fantastic new counters, the lithium drifted germanium.
Yes, right.
That made a big difference in the experiments and
Oh,
everything else.
yeah, that was a big step forward in doing experiments.
Rather than looking at gamma peaks that were huge broad things, you were seeing all of a sudden there's 4 or 5 gamma rays there.
Yeah, that's right. And a much higher resolution.
And most of those counters were actually built in Chalk River here, the Ewan and Tavendale and Dick Fowler's
Yeah,
group.
that's right. They were building these detectors for us, yeah. Which was amazing, really, when you think about it.
It was such a revolution in people who were doing counting onto nuclei. All the nuclei got redone again, and even I guess some of the neutron capture work, where now you were finding thousands of gamma rays, and
Yeah, the resolution improvement made a huge difference in what people were seeing. No question about it.
some of the next period I saw work on Coulomb excitation, but I guess that started to come along when the MP tandem was finally
Yes,
now installed. And John Keener was another person.
John Keener was, he left to go to the university, in Hamilton.
He went to McMaster, that's right.
McMaster, yeah. Yeah, he left. That was my problem. When I got there, then there was exodus of all the people I had wanted to work with. They all left for the universities.
That's right. There was a huge expansion in all of the universities
That's right.
up until almost about 1970, I think. And that's around when I started looking for a job, and there weren't any at the universities either.
What were some of the things you worked on initially, and what were some of the challenges?
Well, my boss was going to be Jeff Chalder, and he put me to work in getting a literature survey on the general properties of uranium dioxide. There was not too much around, because I think the use of the U.S. Navy in developing reactors for their submarines meant that a lot of information would not be disseminated. But in the literature, at least, there was information available, because other countries were using UO2 as well. So that literature survey started me off being I knew that I was going to be not sent home. I had the feeling that you're on probation, Alan. You do a good job. But as it turned out, that was okay. And I got to be introduced to uranium dioxide as the fuel for that we were supposed to be working on. The main problem, it seemed to be, was to satisfy Dr. Lewis's request that the fuel itself should be as dense as possible so that he could have a minimum effect on the core volume. A dense fuel meant a dense core. It had to be big, of course, because of the heavy water natural uranium physics, but at least we had to produce fuel pellets that were good and dense. The Americans were using porous fuel pellets because they were worried about swelling. They thought the porosity would cope with any fuel swelling.
Accommodate the swelling.
Yeah. But in their tests, the fuel pellets were in a vertical stack, and the radiation caused the pellets to shrink, the stacks to collapse a little bit, and so the cladding itself would become unsupported. So they're having all kinds of failure problems because of their choice of porous UO2. That's how I read the literature. We didn't know too much, of course, but that's how I regard their problem with UO2.
Frank Finley was one of the most enthusiastic and friendly people you could ever have. What are some of your recollections of Frank?
Well, he was certainly a hard act to follow. That was what we all said, because he always gave the introductory talk, to the groups. And of course, he was full of jokes and everything. And then you had to go out on tour and give all these boring, statistics and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun, and he really had a way with people of encouraging people to get interested in nuclear energy, and he had a great impact on the nuclear education in Renfrew County. And at the universities and that. We had Madawaska High School would come all the time. Opeongo High School would come. The one high school that never came to science classes was Mackenzie.
Huh.
They never came. And I understood it was because the science teachers felt that the kids already knew everything because their dads worked there, which was totally wrong. The only classes that came from Mackenzie were things like the French immersion. Well, that was from grade 6, or some other sort of specialized group that wasn't, science.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know whether maybe the teachers felt intimidated, or I don't know. But it was really too bad because everybody else came. We used to get Upper Canada College. They came every year and they would stay overnight. One of the really great schools that came was Immaculata High School in Ottawa, and they came for a 2-day tour. They stayed overnight and in Forest Hall. And we had sort of specialized tours, in-depth things, to show them sort of things. And I know one year the in-depth sort of things used to be kind of scattered around. They didn't really make sense. So one year I decided, well, we'll call this, "How do we build a fuel bundle?" And we sort of went through all the steps. You
Right.
ended up with all the sort of things we usually see, but we put it in sort of a cohesive thing, so you ended up with a fuel bundle ending up with testing it at NRU. So that sort of gave them a bit of a better thing. And then on the first night, we would have a supper, and we would invite various scientists to come and talk to the students, and that was really great for the kids to talk to them like that on an informal basis.
Which then brings me to the question about Pickering in 1983 in August, where we actually had a huge long crack in one of the tubes.
Yeah, no, that wasn't anything to do with directly with creep. What that was to do with was, in fact, you mentioned sag just now, and that was to do with sag. And it was to do with the pressure tube sagging into contact with the calandria tube.
Yes.
And when it does that, you get this enormous temperature gradient at the point of contact.
Mm-hmm.
And that has some nasty things going on for it. So what happened in G16, it was P2 G16,
right.
The pressure tube sagged into contact with the calandria tube in 4 or 5 locations. They're fairly close together. Mm-hmm. So what happened was that the hydrogen will move under a stress gradient, it'll move under a temperature gradient, it'll move under a concentration gradient. It's very mobile stuff. And so what it does at the temperature gradient, it moved down the temperature gradient and concentrated and formed hydrides. And then we got blisters of hydrides. You get a lot of hydrogen forming at these points of contact. And so in G16, there was about 4 or 5 of these points of contact. And as you know, hydrides are brittle things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get a bunch of cracks forming, and these cracks linked up, and they were sufficient to exceed what's called the critical crack length. And so if you exceed the critical crack length, the crack will grow unimpeded, and that's the end of your tube, because it's grown a long way down the tube.
Mm-hmm.
This is leading up to the crisis around 1970, when the very first of the CANDU reactors, or the first of the Pickering reactors, was coming on stream, and there was a crisis of heavy water. And again, the Americans were very cooperative and supplied as much water as they could. I think it was NRX that was drained to provide some water. But it was a huge crisis, and Chalk River set up a substantial task force under Howard Ray's direction to look at all of the problems and how they could be solved. And there were a huge number of issues, actually. The ability of the carbon steel that was the towers to resist the effects of hydrogen sulfide was sort of half understood, but had to be understood better. The behavior of the sieve trays had to be understood a good deal better. And so we built a pilot plant that was down at what was called Dawson City. And
yes.
You perhaps remember that. Suitably remote from other parts of the Chalk River site, because of course hydrogen sulfide is enormously toxic. It has about half the toxicity of hydrogen cyanide. People know about hydrogen cyanide, they're not so familiar with H2S. And we did a great deal of work there looking at what could be done to damp down this tendency toward foaming, on design of the sieve trays themselves, ways to make them more effective. And to understand what was actually going on, we introduced gamma scanning, which at the time was fairly revolutionary, where you passed a narrow gamma beam across the width of the actual test facility, so that you could see where the foam density was, and where it broke off. So that was one of the big things that was done. My point of view was slightly different, because we had appreciated by then that computer modeling of this process could be valuable, and we interacted with a group at McMaster University who had begun to put together chemical plant process simulations. And Martin Galley, who was one of my colleagues at the time, spent 6 months down in Hamilton finding out how to apply this GMAX program to our particular purposes. And so we built a very substantial, very detailed simulation of how the GS process actually worked, looking at it on a tray-by-tray basis, looking at the enthalpy balances, including this effect of the heat of reaction inside, and
that I discovered was something that I was really intrigued by and I guess was naturally quite good at. And so my career then, from a technical point of view, headed in the direction of modeling of these processes and then of designing additional plants. And the first plant that had to be designed using this new simulation capability was a redesign of the Glace Bay plant.
We touched on this already, but can you tell me a little bit about your work to automate the burn-up calculations? You know, this ties back to the computer work you were doing and learning.
Yeah, what they were doing is that they had graphs, okay? And it took quite a while to do the calculation then. So I got in touch with the physics office and asked for access to their data because they were listing, you know, every day if they were shut down or, you know, they had a complete record. So what I did is I asked, and that took me 2 years too, before, because the technologist that was doing that didn't want me to have access to their data.
Is that right?
But then another one came short after, well, 2 years later, and she said, sure, as long as you don't touch anything, you know, and don't just take the data. So use that, and then the chart, well, it just it was a power curve, you know, negative, and so I just derived an equation with it, and when I was retired, they were still using that. I don't know if they still use it, but it was. But anyway, one thing I did show that in 2 hours I could do, like if they had 8 shipments, I could do in 2 hours what took weeks before.
So great savings.
Oh yes. Oh, I got an award for that. That's
okay. Oh yes, okay.
And HCL didn't give many awards at the time, you know.
Right, including a cash bonus.
Yes.
And this is in 85.
Yeah.
1985, from Eugene Krytoff.
The final design for the Snow Project, which got approval in the end of 1989, was actually done by Plant Design here at Chalk River, and Ken McFarlane was the lead engineer on that activity. Davis remained firmly involved, and there were a number of others that became involved over the years, including Gwen Milton, Bhaskar Sur, Ted Clifford, and a number of others that were significant participants in the project throughout. So Chalk River Heritage is very strongly involved in the Snow Project. Eventually in 1995, I believe, the mandate for Chalk River became more firmly applied science, particularly reactor physics. And Duncan Hepburn, who had been our initial project manager for the project, being seconded from Chalk River by, at that point, the head of nuclear physics branch, or I guess physics division at that point, Doug Milton, who was another mentor of mine, a substantial degree, as when I was here in the 70s. Duncan Hepburn and Davis Earle moved to work for the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory project, but Chalk River also enabled us to have access to a number of pieces of equipment that had been developed here to be used in the project, and so and they maintained the Chalk River component in snow for about a year after the initial announcement. So we continued to have a very positive relationship with Chalk River on that, and also on the loan of heavy water over the years. It turns out that when the initial request came in, there's a record of the person who received the request from, or the question from Herb Chen, do you think we could get a loan of such heavy water, about 1,000 tons. I think he actually asked for 4,000 in the first place, but that was when he thought the entire cavity would be filled and the shielding would be provided by the heavy water. The answer was, well, probably not 4,000, but maybe 1,000. I think later I learned that 4,000 was pretty nearly the whole inventory. But at that time, Ara Moradian was a very senior person at an AECL, and Jeff Hanna was the head of physics division here. And so Cliff contacted them, and there was almost an instant response from AECL saying, yeah, this is a great, sounds like a great opportunity. And therefore, I think we could probably engineer that loan, or probably could get that approved. And that was a great impetus to be able to go forward with the project. Still took us a while to get all of the different pieces together from various agencies for the, I think it was $55 million, the original cost, in 1990. 25% of it coming from the US and about 5 to 10% coming from the UK, and the rest from Canadian sources. But having that support from AECL and also from International Nickel, INCO, who were the owners of the mine, who said, yes, we could allow you to do this in our mine. Again, it's often individuals that makes these decisions, and there's a fellow named Walter Kurluk, who was the vice president of research at INCO at the time, and it kind of caught his fancy. And I learned later in dealing with mine managers at the Creighton mine, where this is situated in Sudbury, that all engineers take physics in their first year. In fact, from 1991 to about 1994, I taught all the S to Z engineers that came to Queens, first year physics. And they remember and are still grabbed a little bit by what you can do in physics, and that helps when you're dealing with people who have to be convinced that this is a good idea. But George Ewan and Walter Davidson did a tremendous amount of work on convincing various sources of funding. We eventually had help from Alan Bromley, as a matter of fact, in convincing, ironically, not the people in the United States necessarily, I'm sure he helped there, but Premier David Peterson, who went to Washington for a visit and had his ear bent by Alan Bromley on the wonderful nature of this fundamental physics project being done in his province. And we were in danger of not getting Ontario funding until that happened, and it came through after that. So these, quotes, old boys at Chalk River had a substantial help in getting the snow project to take place.
And it turned out to be a great success. We were able to see what you were looking for, and were rewarded for the leadership in it. And
yes, I mean, I received they only give the Nobel Prize to one or two people, and they gave it to the people who were the designated leaders of the Snow Project and the Super Kamiokande project in Japan. And I'm very conscious of that, because really there are over 200 authors on our scientific authors not to mention the tremendous technical background that was applied in building the project, but also the research and development done here at Chalk River and in determining radioactivity levels in heavy water in the early days. We actually traded AECL heavy water with Ontario Hydro in order to get heavy water that came directly out of the lake and hadn't in any way had any small tritium contamination from an upgrade facility that also handled reactor water.
Who were some of the early researchers in around that time?
It's hard to remember all their names.
Was Bromley still around at that time?
Al Bromley was there for the EN.
Right.
And he was a good researcher, and he let you know that. I remember one time we was sitting at the console, having gathered the information that he was looking for, pushing his chair back, and he said, "Gentlemen, we have made history tonight." I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. But later on, Al Bromley became the advisor to the president.
He went to Yale, and then he certainly advanced in the chain in the U.S. And another name around that time, and probably gentle competition, was Harry Gove as well.
Harry Gove was the head of the group that was running the EN.
I also have a picture from the files I was able to dig out of some of the operating crew at that time at the control room, and I didn't recognize all that many faces, but certainly one of them was Neil Byrne, and you and Neil and Moira eventually had an interesting group.
Well, we did. Moira was very interested in what's the name of the charity?
Oxfam at that time.
Oxfam.
That's right.
And Neil and I were getting interested in performing with guitars, and we managed to write up a song about Oxfam. And we were invited by the CBC to record it, and it was broadcast as a background to a speaker that was over the top for about a year. And there was no money involved. No,
charity.
No rights. Anyway, that was an interesting time. I didn't stay entirely, my early career was not entirely with accelerators, because Anne and I went back to Ireland, and I taught college for 5 years. And during that time we had our 2 children. And then I got information through Harry Collins, who was in charge of the operations group, that there was a vacancy, and it was on the MP, the bigger accelerator.
Right.
And that didn't last either. I moved from there to University of Ottawa on their small accelerator.
Right.
And that didn't last because their funding was taken away. And I remember calling Al Harriott, did he have any openings? And he had said, I've got none in the accelerators, but NRU would welcome you. And that turned out to be the best decision I've ever made.
One thing you mentioned actually about White Shell, and that was the Underground Research Laboratory, and its great significance to the planned deep geological disposal of used fuel. Tell us a bit about that, if you would.
Yes. Oh, well, I used to take tours down into the URL, and you had to be over a certain age. I think it was at least over 16. We didn't take big groups, obviously, because it was hard to manage. But a lot of visiting AECL people used to like to come and have a look. visiting scientists, people from university, etc., studying such things used to like to come. So we would meet and greet. We had an auditorium where they could have a look at pictures and just have watch a film or be told some of the facts before we descended into the laboratory. So there were 2 levels, one at 225 metres and another one that was built a bit later at 444, I believe, something like that. But to go into the facility, the visitors used to have to wear a miner's hat with a light, a waterproof jacket and very good shoes or boots. And then we would descend in a cage to the appropriate level, and we could walk around all the little test areas. So that there were tests being carried out there on mining techniques, solute transport, buffer materials for containers, and so on. And each area had its own little room with its tests in, and you could walk around and you could feel the coolness of the rock. And it was rather beautiful, actually, because of the colours in the rock. The geology there was quite interesting. And it was quite an experience. I didn't used to think about being underground 444 metres too often, because rock, as you know, is very, very heavy.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, it used to make cracking noises.
Oh, yeah.
Where it would be settling out, and that could be very disconcerting sometimes. So I always used to warn the visitors that they might hear a little bit of cracking, not to worry. It was quite normal. The rock was just settling out, etc. But there was one day when it cracked and made such a booming noise that the visitors just ran and scarpered in every area. And I had to really reassure them that they were quite all right. Nothing would happen. This was normal. It was quite safe. So, you know, there were a few experiences like that, but it was a most interesting place. It was an excellent representation for the concept for the disposal of high-level nuclear waste. And all that information that they gathered there from all of those experiments was used to assess the safety and reliability, and it was in the end decided by ACL that that was the way to go to dispose of the nuclear waste. And as a result of that, there were 10 great big volumes. It was called the Environmental Impact Statement that were produced by the company to support this technology. But that wrapped up in 1990, unfortunately, and the subject of high-level disposal is still an ongoing dilemma. Is still being decided at the moment.
There, and in the meantime, all the ships pulled out to sea, and I mean, we're talking of a whole flotilla of ships. So I think there were 5 British ships, but there were probably 10 or 11 Australian ships out there as well, including an aircraft carrier. And anyway, we took the scientist out to the ship, out to the Plymouth, and then took him over to one of the islands where the scientists had a concrete shelter, and it was hidden. I mean, you literally couldn't see it, but it was deep into the rock. They had blasted rock and everything to make this thing. And so we dropped him off, and then we started out to sea.
So he would have stayed there when they detonated the bomb in this observation?
Oh, no. We were supposed to go back to our ship.
No, but the scientists were staying in this
Oh,
shop.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
There were a number of scientists that stayed right there.
Okay.
But we had to get back out to our ship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the ship was 15 miles out, and you've got to understand that those landing craft do about 8 knots.
And this is one of these small landing craft now.
This is a small one.
Yeah. Right.
So we started out, and immediately a storm blew up. And this was an area where storms seemed to suddenly just appear. And this storm blew up, and we were shipping water right over the bow of our little landing craft. And there was no way we were going to make it to the ship. I mean, we would have sunk because the bailing thing on a landing craft was a hand crank pump, just one.
Yes.
And there's no way you could keep up with that. So anyway, we radioed in and said, look, you know, we're in trouble here. We're going to sink if we keep going, so we've got to turn around. You know, what do you want us to do? And they said, well, just go to the nearest island and get out of the boat and sit down on the ground, and we'll give you more instructions when you get there. You know, you radio us. So we went there and got to one of the islands there and got up onto the rocks. They were just rocky outcrops. I mean, when we're talking of islands, I'm talking of like just piles of rock really sticking up out of the sea in many cases.
Yeah,
there were some bigger islands, but some of them were quite small. And we were on one of the smaller ones, really. But it happened to be the closest to where we were. So we got out anyway and climbed up on the rocks and sat down on the rocks and waited. We radioed in and said, okay, we're here. And they said, okay, well, when we start doing the timing down, we will let you know, and we want you to sit on the ground with your backs to the bomb and just close your eyes.
So there was no thought that they would stop the countdown and let you guys return?
No, they made it very, very clear there was to be no, because they had already, it was originally going to be set off the day before, and they couldn't because of the bad weather.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had a day of what appeared to be good weather, and they decided to get it in quick, you know. So that's what happened there. So anyway, they got to the countdown, and you know, the usual thing that we've all seen, 10, 9, 8, 7, you know. And then we got to 1, and there was a sort of just a second where sort of nothing seemed to happen. And one of the guys, who was a Cockney on board my ship, he said, the effing thing is, and he was just about to say a dud, when suddenly there was this giant, I mean, we had our eyes closed, and I saw this giant flash, and I had my back to the bomb.
Yeah.
So I thought, wow, you know. And then this voice was screaming on the radio, okay, you can look now, you can look now. And of course we turned round, and there was this cloud roaring up in the typical shape of the atom bombs that you've seen before, you know, the mushroom shape. And but instead of just a cloud of, this thing was burning every colour under the sun.
So about 2 weeks later, I grabbed a bottle of contact cleaner for electronics, you know, for cleaning electronics, and I walked over to Heim's lab. I said, "Okay, Heim, let's give this a go." So Heim prepared his ingredients, polyacrylamide ingredients. This was all prepared in dry ice. He does this all the time, I guess. It was all set up. It wasn't so. So I said, okay, I'm going to spray some of this cleaner in here. So, then just to make sure that I didn't have little puddles inside, I took it up and I shook it, and I put the cap back on and put it back in the water. And Heim says, we'll take it out and warm it up and polymerize it. He says, you'll be ready in less than a couple of hours. So I said, oh, okay. So about an hour and a half later, I walked over and I collected this little vial with that was just prepared, and I walked downstairs to my neutron source, and I took the cap off and I put the detector close to the source, and the entire polymer crawl out of the tube. So I said, "Wow!" I went upstairs and said to Chaim, "I said, Chaim, we've done it." Chaim said, "What did we do?" I said, "We have just established the fundamental principle of the bubble detector." Okay. Of course, there was a lot of work to be done because I had put way too much Freon in the polymer.
Too much energy coming out.
Yeah, a lot of things to jig up, right? You can optimize the superheated liquid to be used. You have to optimize the polymer to contain it, because the viscosity of the polymer has an impact on this performance. Then you got to do the measurements to see what the response functions are like. It involves experiments using a Van de Graaff accelerator, monitoring neutrons, etc., etc. So I knew there was a lot of work to be done. But when I told the branch head, George Cowper at that time, what I had just done, he jokingly said, "I want my shares." And ACL realized that this actually had commercial potential. And they said, "No publications."
Right.
Okay, this has got to be kept quiet because we have to apply for a patent first. Okay, it took about a year for them to get a patent. So finally, after they got a patent, and by that time the detector had been developed to a much more mature state, I made the announcement of the bubble detector at a nice conference in Acapulco, the Solid State Nuclear Track Conference. The announcement of the bubble detector just just spread like wildfire across across the track community. I was told by somebody afterwards that, and I wasn't at the second meeting because it was held in Italy somewhere, that it wasn't even on Dunwich track. They said the topic around the fountain was the bubble detector. So that was the bubble detector, the way it came about.
At the time, the only way one could become a glassblower was to take the appropriate training under a master glassblower. I was taught and trained under the English Guild system and served 7 years as an apprentice. Beside the normal training that I received at ACL, which consisted of written, verbal, and manipulative exams, I received further training by attending courses at Alfred State University in New York over a 4-year period, and numerous courses offered by the American Scientific Glassblowers Society in various American locations. What's interesting here is that just prior to my starting work with Rex, the American Scientific Glassblowers Society was formed. And up until that time, if you worked in a glass shop and a stranger walked in that glass shop, whoever was working there stopped. They didn't want to have them see what you were doing. If you were the son or grandson or something, it was kept in the family.
Closed shop.
Right. And the Americans changed that. They decided that to spread the knowledge that was available and to form a society. And it was a real godsend that it arrived just about the time that I was there. So I became a member, and Rex, we became members of the society, which opened up that position to. We were able to attend every year. They had a symposium every year that we attended. So, and then glassblowers from all over the United States would attend the symposium and present a paper on some of the work they were doing. The amount of information that was available was mind-boggling because it was all printed and we got a copy afterwards. And I was also a member of the British Society as well as the American Society, and a charter member of the Canadian Society at the time.
Anyway, is that perhaps where the Dow Corning facilities really got going in through there? That's right.
I've spent numerous trips there at Corning, New York. Yeah. You may be interested in knowing that the starting salary at the time for my apprenticeship was $1,540 annually, or 53 cents net, twice a month. I worked with Mr. Bailey for 25 years until his retirement. Since that time, I have taken on the department. Now have Mr. Darcy Doing, who is at a 4th-year apprentice working with me. The purpose of the glassblowing department is to provide custom glassware or modify existing glassware, primarily for the chemical, metallurgical, biological, medical department.
In August 1st, 1983, there was a big shock of Pickering 2 pressure tube failing.
Right.
And so how did that change things for your work?
Well,
were you expecting that kind of outcome, perhaps?
We could have been.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yes, I mean, that was a huge effort. Suddenly there was this tube which split from end to end, right?
Yeah, it was about 3.5 meters long, I think, the split, yeah.
And nobody had got a clue. And I remember that, so the tube was taken out and came up, and I remember a gang of us, it was fairly late at night, and we were all peering down at this tube, and it was pulled out of the flask in the NRU bays, trying to see what the hell it was. And in fact, fuel bundles were stuck in the crack, fuel elements.
Oh, they were still?
I think so, yeah. I think there's a fuel element stuck in there.
Okay, okay.
Anyway, so there were two issues. It was a Zircaloy tube, of course.
Yes.
And so it had picked up a lot of hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
We knew the phenomena of delayed hydride cracking, but we didn't realize what the content was of an operating tube, because all you could do was lab tests and short-term tests in NRU, essentially. Okay. And the other thing was the other initiating factor, as mentioned earlier, about hydrogen going down the thermal gradient.
Yeah, yeah.
So there had been some. So the reactors used to be shut down to gauge the diameter, because that could be done non-destructively. Okay, you take the fuel out and run a device down to measure the diameter, and that was being done. And also, because the tubes are only supported at each end through the end fittings, they tend to sag.
Mm-hmm.
And
especially with all that uranium bundles, heavy bundles in the middle. Yeah.
And so the information was all there, but not put together to realize that the garter springs had moved.
Mm-hmm.
When we look back on it, yes,
the garter springs
there were little bits of information everywhere that said, yes, the garter, but the garter springs must have moved. And in the early days, the garter springs were tight on the inside of the calandria tube.
Oh, they expanded outwards.
Well, they were worried about the garter spring constraining the pressure tube and affecting it.
Ah.
So it was a loose fit on the pressure tube, but a tight fit inside the calandria tube.
Right, right.
And so whereas a garter spring tight on the pressure tube would not move, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the others could move with vibration and everything. And although they were put there to maintain the gap between the calandria tube and the pressure tube, with the vibration and everything, they'd moved and left too big an unsupported area, so it had gone down and touched the calandria tube and then got a cold spot. The hydrogen had moved there, and there was a flaw, and the blisters had formed, and etc., and we got the delayed hydride cracking. But in fact, I was put in charge of the investigation at Chalk River work in those days to find out what had happened.